Welcome back to the Delegate. We saw from our previous episode how powerful some of the countries on the Security Council are. Our delegate from Russia vetoed the resolution, and therefore our delegates now have to go back and debate so that they can reach a compromise that will be agreeable to all parties involved. Let's see how the debate proceeds.
Honorable delegates, I declare open this session. And I wish to welcome you all to the council. After last session's elaborate discussions and debates, I'm sure that behind the scenes you've consulted with your capitals to find out the way forward for our discussions on the situation in Darfur. I wish to invite delegates to propose the way forward for our discussions. France.
Thank you, Mr. President. During our last session, we debated a lot on this topic, and I believe the way forward now is for us to take immediate measures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, France, for your proposal. Any delegates willing to follow up with France's proposal? The USA.
Thank you, Mr. President. The US believes that countries should take a look at the situation in Sudan from a different perspective to be able to impose sanctions upon Sudan. And secondly, countries should make putting an end to gross human rights abuse their main priority. Thank you very much.
On that note, are there any delegates who would want to table a motion for discussions? Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Thank you, Mr. President. From all that has been said from the delegates, I move that there be a 1 hour unmoderated caucus to discuss and come out with a resolution to help the people of Darfur.
Anyone to second the motion? The UK.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second this motion in order to enable delegates to be able to go into an unmoderated caucus to discuss and come out with an solution. Thank you.
Anyone against the motion? Seeing none, I declare this session suspended for 1 hour on moderated caucus. I call the House to order. I welcome you back from the unmoderated caucus. I have information that we have 2 draft resolutions coming before the House. May I invite the representative from the first draft, being sponsored by China and Russia, to present their draft.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Security Council, alarmed by the fact that war has broken out in the Darfur region of Sudan, fully aware of the lack of health and education facilities in refugee camps in Sudan, bearing in mind that the difficulties faced by neighboring countries of Sudan to accommodate the Sudanese refugees, gravely concerned at the fact that people, especially women and children, in the Darfur region of Sudan die every day, urges member states to aid in the development and empowerment of women in Sudan, support the government of Sudan in its decision to create more human rights laws, expresses its hopes that peace will prevail in Sudan soon, expresses its appreciation to the neighboring countries of Sudan for their tireless efforts to accommodate the Sudanese refugees, calls upon the Sudanese government to disarm and persecute all guilty people involved in terrorism in Sudan. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, delegate from China. May I invite the rep from the second group to present draft 2?
Thank you, Mr. President. The Security Council, recognizing the fact that genocide is taking place in Sudan, fully alarmed by the number of people who have lost their lives and many people who have been displaced. Deeply concerned by the problems neighboring countries face due to the constant inflow of refugees. Alarmed by the complaints of refugees that the militia still come to their camps to harm them. Having devoted attention to the fact that the economic growth of Sudan has been reduced drastically. Realizing that there are actually several rebel groups fighting the government. Taking into account that the Sudanese citizens are implicated in the violence. Welcoming the fact that countries have made attempts to end the civil war that has brought starvation and other forms of human rights abuse. 1. Demands that the government of Sudan fulfills its commitment to disarm the Janjaweed militia and bring the Janjaweed leaders to justice. Calls upon other member states to support the UNAMID with troops to strengthen peacekeeping operation in Sudan. Recommends that schools and hospitals be built in refugee camps and qualified workers be employed. Requests maximum security in refugee camps and constant supply of humanitarian aid. Further recommends that the Sudanese government account for the use of AIDS. Expresses its hope that a war crime tribunal should be established in Africa. Endorses sanctions on Sudanese citizens to block their assets and additional companies owned and controlled by the government of Sudan. Urges all states, in particular those in the region, to report to the committee on the actions they have taken to implement measures to end the war. Urging all parties to take the necessary steps to prevent and put an end to the violation of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Delegate. May I remind the committee that this draft is sponsored by the USA, UK, Japan, and France. I open the draft up for debate. USA.
Thank you, Mr. President, for draft resolution 1. They stated that women die every day. What has China and its allies done to combat this problem?
Right of reply from China.
Thank you, Mr. President. We, the people who created the sponsors of this resolution, believe that there should be support to the government of Sudan in the decision to create more humanitarian laws to curb the situation that's been occurred. Thank you.
May I invite Sudan to talk on this issue of human rights in the country?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I do believe that the making of humanitarian laws is also a good way to curb this problem. If laws are made against the raping of women and the slaughtering of children, this, I believe, would help reduce the Janjaweed militia and other militias from entering into refugee camps to cause humanitarian crisis there. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Sudan. Any more points for debate? Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'd like to. They stated in their draft resolution that those who causing trouble should be disarmed by the government. So, if China is the country which sends almost all the arms to the Sudanese government, then why is it that they are now calling that all the people should be disarmed, since they are the ones who send the arms there? So don't they think it would be better if they completely stop sending the arms there?
Now, delegate, it's not known yet where these arms are coming from, but I'll give the delegate from China an opportunity to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, these arms that are being sent to Sudan were based on a trade agreement we signed with the Sudanese government before the war in the year 2000. We were to give them ammunition or arms to support or help their military strength, whilst we were to gain from their oil resource they had. Thank you.
So is China's position that these arms are not purposely for the war? Thank you. Any more points of debate? And I would want delegates to address specific issues in the draft. Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the delegate from Bosnia and Herzegovina's question, he said they said, and I want to know who in particular he's referring to. Thank you.
He was referring to draft 1. So all those who were in draft 1, and I'm happy that China has already addressed that issue. Any more points for debate? France.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the first draft resolution, the sponsors and allies made mention of the fact that terrorists, those who are helping this conflict, should be persecuted by the government. But the government has been called on several times to do this, but since it's failing, don't they have any other alternative? Because since the government has failed continuously to try the people, what shows this time around they'll fulfill that promise? Thank you.
Points of concern there from France. Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are hopeful we will succeed this time because all the other countries are putting so much pressure on the government of Sudan that we believe that when this kind of pressure is put on them, they will heed to our advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Any more points of debate, specifically on the drafts that have been presented? USA.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise on the point of information on draft resolution 1. I'd like to know the main priority they are focused on, what they need to end the war in Darfur. Thank you very much.
Draft 1. May I invite the sponsors to address this issue? China.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, our draft resolution was all centered or based on one theory, and that theory was self-governance, and self-governance in the aspect that Sudan will be governed by both the 14 parties, including the Arabs and the black Christians in Sudan. So I'm sure that with this kind of idea being implemented in Sudan, peace can be achieved.
Any more points? USA.
I rise on the point of information. Thank you, Mr. President. Why has draft resolution 1 not able to impose sanctions? Why didn't they take this step? Thank you very much.
It has come to the notice of the Secretariat that that's the major difference between the two drafts. The sponsors to reply, China.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Honorable Delegate from the United States and the whole House, the main reason why we are not imposing sanctions on Sudan is because, 1, we believe in self-governance, and self-governance as already stated earlier. And also we believe that if countries help bring economic functionaries, etc., to Sudan, peace can be achieved. Thank you.
Brazil.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I rise on the point of information for draft resolution 2. In draft resolution 2, it was stated that they are planning to build schools and hospitals in refugee camps and also employ qualified people. Since people are fleeing from the country, I want to ask the question to the sponsors of draft resolution 2 that where are they going to get the qualified people and how are they going to raise the money to be able to build these structures? Thank you.
USA.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for the question. First, where are we going to get the qualified people from? It's not all of them that have fled to neighboring countries. Some of them are still in Sudan. And what we are saying is that we are going to get these qualified people into our schools. And why we are building the schools is because education is really needed in this region, because without education, most things will not be done. So that's why we chose to take the stand. Thank you very much.
Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. To add something to what my fellow delegates from USA said, I would like to say that we can also bring qualified people from other countries, even let's say African countries, to come and help these schools and hospitals build up, so that the education aspect for the refugee children will be solved. Thank you.
It looks like our observer country have something to say. Sudan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as a representative from Sudan, I would like to announce to the entire House gathered here today that 75% of the abled, of the people who can do the job, or the abled men and women, are fleeing from Sudan to neighboring countries. So, for the sponsors of draft resolution 2, I would like to tell you that you're planning on building, getting teachers from Sudan is going to be hindered by the fact that most of them are not there to do that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to add something to what my fellow delegate from US said. Well, since the war has disrupted the education system in Sudan, many parents will not allow their children to go outside, to go to school outside. This is why we think we thought it wise that we should bring the education to the camp, so that it will be easily accessed, or to be easily accessible to their parents and students as well in the camps. Thank you.
The United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. To add something to what my fellow delegates from Turkey said, since most parents are afraid that their children will be in danger if they go to school, we have provided security on these educational facilities in order to protect them and to assure parents that their children are in safe hands and nothing will happen to them. Thank you.
From UK, the resolution from your group mentioned security, but it didn't really state where the security was coming from. I would want to know, is it being provided by the sponsors of this draft, or is it planned to be provided by the Sudanese government?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sure it will be provided by the sponsors of this draft resolution. Thank you.
France.
Thank you, Mr. President. We believe that if sanctions are imposed on the people in the Darfur region, it will limit their movements and will make them compromise with the peace agreements that are trying to be established. Thank you.
China.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would, in the draft resolution too, they stated that education and building of schools is a way of achieving peace. I also like to ask the sponsors and signatories of that resolution, of that draft resolution, how that can be able to revive the labor force of the country, since most of them have fled to other countries. Thank you.
I think this issue has been mentioned as a concern from Sudan, and I'm happy to see the placard from Japan, and I would want to hear from.
Thank you, Mr. President. In our first session, our delegates from Sudan, he said that he knows that the people of Sudan will come back to Sudan after the war. So we believe that while education is ongoing in the refugee camps, when the war is ended, the people will come back and will help build the labor force of Sudan. Thank you.
Russia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we vote on the resolution 1. Thank you.
This motion has been tabled by Russia. Any seconder? Uganda.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. As you've seen, we've debated on the draft resolutions we've heard, and we would like to vote on draft resolution 1. Thank you.
Any against? USA.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, USA believes we've not deliberated enough. Certain issues need to be clarified for us to move to a vote. So therefore, I think this session should still go on. Thank you very much.
I'll take a division of the House. Delegates in favor of the motion that we vote on draft resolution 1, show by placards. Thank you. Delegates against? Abstentions? Thank you. With 6 delegates for the motion, 7 against the motion, and 2 abstaining, this motion fails and we continue with deliberations. Any more points for debate? France.
Thank you, Mr. President. To answer the question from the Sudanese delegate about how we can achieve complete education, we think that when we bring teachers from other African countries to teach, we will pay them properly and ensure that there's 24/7 security to ensure they don't also flee from the country. Thank you.
Gabon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to ask a question to the second resolution, the resolution 2. Please, about the sanctions. What if the people in the Darfur region don't want to be sanctioned? How are they going to continue with the sanction plan that they are focused on? Thank you.
In other words, how do the sponsors intend to implement these sanctions? UK.
Thank you, Mr. President. To answer the question from my honorable delegates from Gabon, we believe that these sanctions will pressure the government of Sudan in order to comply with our decisions, because they have decided not to comply with our decisions, and therefore these sanctions will imposed on them will make them agree with us. Thank you.
Yes, UK, that's the effects of the sanctions are clear to Gabon, but the question is, how do you intend to implement those sanctions? USA.
Thank you, Mr. President. It takes time for a caterpillar to grow into a butterfly. We will continue to impose the sanction on them, and as a matter of time, they will get tired, and one day they shall take this in consideration. Thank you very much.
The USA, you've still used the word sanctions and imposing it on them. In what form? How are you going to implement those sanctions? What kind of sanctions are you going to place on the people of Sudan? I think that is where the question really lies. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, citizens have been implicated in the violence, and these sanctions are going to block the assets of these citizens implicated in the violence, so they do not support the government together with the Janjaweed in the civil war in Sudan. Thank you very much.
I think that is clearer. So financial assets are going to be frozen. Any more points on the floor of the House? Austria.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we vote on the draft resolution 1, because we've debated a lot and I think we should vote on the resolution.
Any seconders? United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second this motion because I think it will give an opportunity for us to decide and specify whether this draft resolution is the best for this problem. Thank you.
Any delegates against the motion? Seeing none, it's so decided. I put the draft resolution 1 up for vote. Delegates in favor of draft resolution 1, show by placards. Thank you. Delegates against? Abstentions? Honorable delegates, with 9 for the motion and 5 against the motion, unfortunately I have to announce that we have 2 veto countries voting against the motion, and therefore this draft resolution has been vetoed, making it automatically a failure. I therefore declare this draft resolution failed. Thank you very much. Any points on the floor of the House? May I invite the sponsors of the first draft, after the failure of that draft, to make some comments on how the voting went?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would like to say that the vote that was carried a few minutes ago was a free and fair one, and I believe that if even our draft resolution didn't pass, we can give suggestions to the other draft resolution to make it a full, compact peace plan for Sudan. Thank you.
Are there any more points on the floor of the House? Brazil.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I think that the sanctions placed on the Sudanese government on the freeze of assets is harsh, and so I propose that it be softened a little bit to allow the Sudanese people get access to some basic needs. Thank you.
Any reaction from the sponsors of draft resolution 2? France.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we break for an unmoderated caucus to implement the amendments stated by the sponsors of draft resolution 1. Thank you.
Thank you, France. Anyone to second the motion? Lebanon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Since all the amendments have been made, I second the motion that the resolution 2 be voted for. Thank you.
Any objections? Seeing none, I put draft resolution 2 up for vote. Delegates in favor of the second draft resolution show by placards. Thank you. Delegates against the motion. Thank you. Abstentions. Thank you very much. Honorable delegates, there are no vetoes on this draft resolution, and we have 12 for the motion for the draft and then 1 against the draft. Therefore, by a majority decision without any veto, this resolution passes. Thank you very much for your cooperation and your hard work. The Secretariat will make all the resolutions available at your offices before morning tomorrow. Thank you. Any points on the floor of the House? Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we adjourn this session to our next meeting. Thank you.
Any seconders? Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second this motion because I believe that we've come to a final consensus. Thank you.
Any objections to the motion to adjourn meeting? Seeing none, I declare this meeting adjourned till our next session.
The Council has now reached a compromise and a resolution has been adopted. From this point, necessary steps are going to be taken to ensure that all the stipulations in the resolution are followed to the letter. Let's see how this goes. In our next episode, our delegates are going to convince us as to why they should be Ghana's delegate to the United Nations. Join us again, same time next week. Bye.